Thank you all for being here in person, and thank you to several people who I see are online today. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you to our very first Emory Global Diabetes Research Center Distinguished Lecture, and to introduce our first awardee. I speak on behalf of myself, Muhammad Ali, one of the co-directors of the center, and Venkat Narayan, who many of you know is the founding director of the Emory Global Diabetes Research Center, and many of our members who both are online and are here, including luminaries like Guillermo Amperez and others. So thank you again for being here. What can I actually say about our first awardee, Dr. Viswanathan Mohan, which you won't see in the very many bios that are out there about him? But let me give you just a quick couple of highlights. Dr. Mohan runs the Dr. Mohan's Diabetes Specialty Center, and he's the chairman there, which has over 50 clinics and over 650,000 patients that they look after across India and the Middle East. He's won over 200 awards in his career, including the Padma Shri, which is India's highest civilian honor, and is one of very few, if maybe not the only person I know that is about to win his second American Diabetes Association Award. About 7 years ago, he won the Harold Rifkin Award for International Excellence in Diabetes. And just this weekend, in 2 or 3 days, he's going to win the Kelly West Award for Excellence in Epidemiology, which is fantastic. So huge congrats on that. He's a prolific author, studies genomics, studies epidemiology, studies various aspects of diabetes, which he will tell you about in his distinguished lecture today. But I would like to add just a little personal touch. The other thing about Dr. Mohan is he's an incredibly generous person, both in heart and in spirit. I remember 16 years ago when I showed up in Chennai for the first time, straight out of Oxford. I just joined the Emory group, but my first assignment was to be in Chennai for a few months. And Dr. Mohan and his wife, Rema, at the time, and his daughter Anju literally welcomed me into their home, into their research home, if you will, and have really helped me grow my career. And so even to this day, my first authored paper has a senior author named Dr. V. Mohan at the end of the paper. So from a personal standpoint, we are honored that you are here. Thank you for accepting our invitation, and we look forward to your talk.
Works. So thank you, Mo, for those kind words. It's a great honor and privilege for me to be here at Emory to renew my contact with collaborators and friends with whom I've been collaborating for 2 decades. And I know what a great honor it is to be the first lecturer and the first recipient of the distinguished lecture. I would like to thank both Venkat and Mo for inviting me for conferring this honor on me and for inviting me to deliver this lecture. I know that there's a scientific committee who has selected me, and I'm deeply grateful to this committee. When I received this invitation to give the talk, I was wondering what I should talk about, because just in 2-3 days, I'm going to give another talk at the ADA, where I'm going to talk about the epidemiology of diabetes in South Asians. So I didn't want to repeat the same talk here because I know some of you would be attending that lecture. So I thought the best thing would be to go back, go down memory lane to see how we got to where we are with the collaboration, particularly with the Madras Diabetes Research Foundation, where I work, and Emory University. And I'm aware that there are a lot of junior people in the audience who are just starting off, maybe. And the first thing that I want to tell them is that we're always looking for grants and we're always looking for money to start work. But to start collaborations, you really don't need that. What you need is friendship, and what you need is trust in people. And that's how we started with our collaboration with MDRF. But before I actually go to the MDRF and Emory collaboration, I want to go back a few years earlier and show you 3 or 4 slides, because my father was a very well-known diabetologist, and often heard people remark after lectures and after hearing me speak and say, oh, this guy, he was born with a golden spoon. And so, it's not surprising that he is able to do research. So when I started with my father, I started in something like this. This is not the exact picture. I didn't take a picture, unfortunately, at that time. But when I started off with my father, he was 18 years old, and I just joined medical college. And one of the conditions for which I told my father I'll do medicine is that if he allows me to do research. So true enough, when I joined medical college, I told my father, where's my research lab? And he said, there's a garage like this. And he said, that's your research lab. Now you can set it up. You do what you want with that. So we started with a part-time technician, and that's me when I was 18. And that's my father. And we had nothing. We had no computers. We had no staff. We had no lab. We had nothing. So he said, well, there are a pile of records, and you can get medical records, all handwritten. And he said, you can go through them and you think of what you want to do and you write whatever papers you want to write. So that's how we started. And so it's possible even with nothing to start. If you are really passionate about doing something, it's possible to do research even under those circumstances. But then when I went a year later and when I went to 3rd year of medical school, I was very fortunate to be mentored by Professor Lalita Kameshwaran, who later became our vice chancellor, dean, and so on. So she saw the research passion that I had. And again, we had another dilapidated animal house in the medical college. This is one of the oldest medical colleges, by the way, the 2nd oldest medical college in India. Only 1 week before that, the Calcutta Medical College had been started. So you can call this as the oldest medical college. Madras Medical College is also the medical college where the first UK women doctors trained, because women were not allowed to become doctors in the United Kingdom. So they had to come to Chennai to study medicine in Madras Medical College. So it was her help. And with that, early experiments on dogs inspired by the work of Banting and Best, trying to produce a model of diabetes in dogs. We actually did pancreatectomy, different levels of pancreatectomy, to see how much of the pancreas you have to remove to develop a type 2 diabetes model without completely removing all the islet cells. We managed to do that, but unlike Banting and Best, it didn't go much beyond that. But I was very happy that even as a student, we had some time to do some research. So the Madras Diabetes Research Foundation was actually set up in 1996. It was set up in one room, and we had our first staff whom we had hired. And from there, we started building. I first met Venkat in June 2001, when he was not at Emory. So I had come to Emory to give a talk, and Professor Sampath Parthasarathy, with whom we are collaborating at that time, he had invited me to give a talk and had come to Emory to give a talk. And Venkat, I think, was at CDC. 2001, you're at CDC? Yeah. So he had come for my talk like this. And that's how the friendship started. So after the talk, we had a brief chat. And he said, hey, we should collaborate. And I said, come over to Chennai. So he did come over to Chennai. And when he came, we had zero funding. And we said, when he saw all the records that we had. So when I started with my father, we did not have electronic records. But in 1991, when we started MDRF, we started with electronic records. So we did have electronic records from that day until now. So all the 650,000 patients which Mo mentioned are all on electronic records. So he said, why don't we start with looking at some of the retrospective studies? And that's how the collaboration actually started with MDRF. And then, of course, Jim Curran, your dean, whom we met last night briefly at Mo's party, soon came down to Chennai to announce that initial funding from Emory was available. And that's the announcement which he came down. My late wife is also there in the picture. And so from 2008, we started getting funding for collaborations between MDRF and Emory University. And there was a competition at that time where Emory wanted to go global, and there was some seed money put in. We had applied for that, and we managed to get that particular grant. And that started the formal collaboration between Emory University and MDRF. We soon applied to the International Diabetes Federation for doing another project, which I'll talk about. And from there on, there's been no looking back, and series of projects have got funded, and I'll talk about them. So initially when the GDRC, the name was conceived, the Global Diabetes Research Center, it started off in Chennai when Venkat came there, and at our research center in Siruseri, we actually inaugurated the Global Diabetes Research Center, which has since then grown to become a truly global research center. And through these, we have completed at least 6 projects now, and I'm going to go through each of these projects of how one has led to the other. I mentioned that we had applied for funding from the International Diabetes Federation. That was again a very difficult grant to get. It was highly competitive, but we had applied for that and we scored very high, and we were actually rated #1 among all the projects, to such an extent that the IDF actually invited us to train others how to write grants. And we had 2 or 3 training sessions where this grant was chosen as a model grant as to how to write a grant. And then both Venkat and I had gone to many times to IDF to teach others how to write grants and how to apply for grants. And that was a study which we started called as the DCLIP study. The DCLIP study, and you'll find Lisa, I think, is in the audience here, and Mary Beth, I think, could not make it today. But Lisa, Mary Beth, and Ranjini, who is down there at the bottom, they have been the backbone of this particular project on prevention of diabetes. We call it as the Diabetes Community Lifestyle Improvement Program, or the DCLIP project. What is new about DCLIP was that all the earlier prevention trials had focused on one form of pre-diabetes called as impaired glucose tolerance, IGT. So we realized that there was no study which had looked at the other form of pre-diabetes, which is impaired fasting glucose. So this study was the first to include people with both IFG and IGT. And this picture brings back memories of Venkat visiting us, and the van which went around the whole of Chennai recruiting people to be included in this trial. So we used an adaptation of the DPP, the Diabetes Prevention Program. We culturally modified it, developed 16 lessons on prevention, and then used that to try to prevent diabetes in people in Chennai. This was published in Diabetes Care. And what is interesting about this paper was, for the first time, we showed something very interesting. That if you look at the how many people you could prevent diabetes, what proportion of people you could prevent developing diabetes, it was very interesting that if you had IGT, impaired glucose tolerance, or even if you had combined IFG and IGT, about 1/3 of people could be prevented from developing. So the reduction in the incidence of diabetes was 36% and 31%. But to our surprise, we found that if you had isolated IFG, that means you did not have impaired glucose tolerance. The 2-hour value was normal in the OGTT, but the fasting alone was elevated. This is the condition called as isolated IFG, despite lifestyle, despite diet, exercise, and when needed, metformin added in a stepped-up fashion, we could not prevent diabetes. Only 12% reduction in the incidence of diabetes. This is the first time in the world literature that this has been reported. And so we have concluded that we can prevent diabetes easily in those with IGT, but not with IFG. And this is another picture taken when Venkat visited us, and some of the PhD students, both from Chennai as well as from Emory University, are there in this picture. Lisa then did a very interesting study, which is quoted quite a lot. So what we did was, while recruiting people for the DCLIP study, we first of all ruled out those who had diabetes. We go to people's homes and ask them, do you have diabetes? If you have diabetes, then we exclude them. If they don't have diabetes, then we do OGTTs on them. Large number, 26,000 or something, we screen. And along with that, we did the OGTT, we did a fasting, we did a 30-minute, and we did a 120-minute. And using the fasting glucose and fasting insulin and the 30-minute insulin and the 30-minute glucose, we can calculate what's called as a disposition index. It's a very nice, simple way of calculating pancreatic beta cell function, whether beta cells are working or not. And shown here are the results in those with normal glucose tolerance, the two types of pre-diabetes, the combined IFG and IGT, the combined pre-diabetes type, and those who were newly diagnosed with diabetes. They didn't know they had diabetes, but when we went to their homes, we did the OGTT, and lo and behold, they had diabetes. And shown in yellow is the insulin secretion. And you can see that by the time they have pre-diabetes, already they're losing beta cell function. And if you have combined IGT and IFG, there's still a stage of pre-diabetes. You can see how much of beta cell function they've already lost. And those with newly diagnosed diabetes, they have only about 20 or 30% of the beta cell function of those who have normal glucose tolerance. So this is a very interesting study showing that there is grossly reduced beta cell function, even in those who have very mild degrees of glucose intolerance. This is a kind of an eye-opener as far as we are concerned. A series of other papers followed. I'm just showing these just to show you how productive a collaboration can be. And these are all related to the DCLIP study. Various aspects of them have been reported, including the recruitment challenges, how difficult it is to recruit people for a study like the DCLIP study. The point I mentioned about the IFG being more difficult kind of pre-diabetes to prevent diabetes was later shown in 3 other studies, one from the Kerala study by Thangappan, one by Melanie Davies and colleagues from the UK, and a Japanese study. So Satish Tirunavkarsu recently put these together in a meta-analysis in a very well-received paper in Diabetes Care. Very striking. If you look at those, we combine these 4 studies, the reduction in the incidence of diabetes, the hazards ratio is 35% if you have IGT alone. If you have combined IFG and IGT, there was a hazards ratio of 0.51, showing there's a 49% reduction. But look at the isolated IFG, the hazards ratio is 0.97. So it's only a 3% reduction, even worse than what we saw in DCLIP alone when you combine these 3 studies. So a commentary was written on this in the same issue, saying that till now we have treated all pre-diabetes as if they were one type. But now we have to classify them. And those with IFG, we really don't know what to do, wondering whether next what study we should do to try to prevent diabetes in those with IFG. And all this actually came out from the first study, the DCLIP study. DCLIP is continuing to produce papers. That's another thing, that once the primary papers are written, you don't have to stop with that. Various students come up, taking up various aspects of the study which is not yet completed. And a study like DCLIP, which is more than a decade old now, still continuing to produce papers. You just need an idea, and then you can keep these papers going. The young diabetes study actually came when Venkat visited and looked at our electronic records and said, hey, you have a wealth of information here. You have so many people with young onset type 1 and type 2 diabetes. This gives us a golden opportunity to study these in greater detail, because type 2 diabetes in the young is not so common, even in the United States and other countries. So we had quite a large series. And so these studies were led by Amuda in our group, and initially without some funding, and then later on we got some funding to support these studies. And I'll show you briefly some of these results. First of all, if you look at the age at diagnosis of type 1 and type 2, you can see that the type 1 shown in green at younger ages, say below 10 years, there's virtually no type 2. We had 4 cases or 5 cases of children 7 years old and having type 2, but it's virtually near 0. But as you go to adolescence, you can see the type 1 kind of falling off in our population and type 2 kind of taking off. Even by 15, 16 years of age, you can see. So if you come to our clinic and see somebody who's 15 years old or 16 years old, you can't be sure that it's type 1. So you need to do detailed studies to see which type of diabetes that they have. Then we started looking at beta cell function and insulin resistance in these young onset patients. And Venkat will be very happy to see these old results. He is very fond of the insulin secretory defect. So what's shown here is OGTTs done in these young people. Some of them have normal glucose tolerance, some have pre-diabetes, and some have diabetes. And if you see the diabetes group here, Venkat, you can see in these young people, the 30-minute value about which you talk. Many years ago, you already shown that. Look at the gross reduction. So just that one value, if you keep looking at the 30-minute value of insulin, you can clearly show the, suppose you had done this in people whom you didn't know who is going to develop diabetes. By looking at the 30-minute value, I believe that you can now kind of predict who are the ones who are likely to develop diabetes. We also looked at the people with and without adiposity. Does it make any difference? And you can see that the disposition index is actually lower in those who have adiposity. So there is a link between what you have, the fat in the abdomen moving into the liver, where the liver seems to be the main issue, at least in South Asians that we've studied. It starts off with subcutaneous and visceral fat, but it rapidly moves into the liver. And it's the liver fat which seems to be driving the diabetes epidemic. What about complications in young onset people with diabetes, type 1 and type 2? This is led by Dr. Rajalakshmi, our ophthalmologist in the group. And you can see that both in young onset type 1 and type 2, retinopathy is quite common. So these are people about whom we should worry, because here are people getting diabetes. Take a person with type 2 diabetes getting diabetes at the age of 15 years. By the time they're 35 years old, they already have 20 years of diabetes. And there's a very strong chance that they'll have retinopathy and kidney disease when they're 35 years old. In the case of type 1, we don't have any prevention. But in the case of type 2, you can actually prevent that or delay it so that they won't end up with these complications. Amuda then went on to look at all the complications, and shown here are these are incidence data now. The earlier one is prevalence data. This is new onset. At the beginning, they didn't have it, and then they developed the complications later, so incidence. Now, if you match them and look at the young onset type 1 and type 2, virtually no difference. So it's not that type 2 is an innocuous disease. It's as bad, if not worse. Look at heart disease. It's actually much higher in the young onset type 2. These are people who are 35, 40 years old, and they already have heart disease at that age. So it's quite worrisome, the epidemic of diabetes. We've also looked at, this is Gokul Krishnan from our team, who looked at various adipokines, and we were able to show that the levels of various adipokines, adiponectin, of course, is expected being much lower in those with type 2 diabetes, whereas if you look at TNF-alpha and leptin and MCP and so on, much higher in these young onset type 2s. We have found an interesting observation while we are doing these studies. Again, this is led by Gokul. If you use serum adiponectin, we know that adiponectin is very low in type 2, patients with type 2. But interestingly enough, in those with type 1, it's actually higher than those in the control population. So we said, hey, then why don't we use this simple test, simple assay to distinguish type 1 and type 2. We don't need C-peptide and GAD. We can use this, and that's what he showed in this particular thing, that at certain cut point, below a certain cut point, you cannot have type 2 at all. And above a certain cut point, it has to be type 1 if you have values. It's a very interesting observation that we made. Now, what about younger type 2s versus older type 2? Are these people with young onset type 2 having the same risk of complications, or are they having a lower or higher risk? And this is led by my son-in-law, Ranjit, who was the first author of this paper. And we took the older onset type 2s as reference, matched them for duration of diabetes, and looked at retinopathy and nephropathy and so on. Actually, the younger onset type 2s seem to have a greater risk of developing complications because they seem to have a more aggressive form of diabetes than the older ones. So it means the younger you get type 2 diabetes, it's a more aggressive disease. And therefore, you have to control the diabetes even better. Moving on, by this time, we started the so-called CARS study, which has now become famous, and that's in the year 2010. So it's almost 14 years since the CARS studies started. And this was an expansion of the EGDRC now to other parts of South Asia. New Delhi came in, and Pakistan, we had Karachi also included, the Aga Khan Center. And we also had other institutions involved here in the US, and this was funded by the NHLBI. So the CARS stands for Center for Cardio-Metabolic Risk Reduction in South Asia. And this is the full group here with Mo Ali leading the group. And we have Dr. Bakaran, Dr. Srinath Reddy from the Public Health Foundation of India, Dr. Nikhil Tandon from the All India Institute, Ed Gregg initially, and we had Dr. Kadir from Karachi, at least in the initial part of the collaboration. Later on, it became a two-city collaboration, and my team from MDRF as well. I'm not going to go into this, but CARS is a study which has looked at various aspects, not just diabetes and not just cardiovascular disease, but now going on to look at many, many aspects of diabetes, emerging etiologies like pollution and many, many other. This is one of the, somebody asked me, do you have a cohort of people? This is one of the best cohorts we have going on now for 15 years now in New Delhi and in Chennai, representative sample. And we are able to get several rounds of the cohorts added on. So first you had the cross-sectional one, then you had the longitudinal one, then the second cross-sectional one, and so on. I'm not going to go into detail because all of you work on this, and some of these are shown here. Sample size is quite large, and the retention in these cohorts is very high, which is why we are, I think, able to attract some of the funding which we had received. And this just summarizes how we have gone from 2010 to now 2020 and beyond. In some years, collecting only questionnaires, other years getting blood samples, and so on. I'm not going to show you all the studies which have come out through this, but just to tell those of you who are not aware of the CARS cohort, it's been one of the most productive studies, and studies on looking at various aspects. Different people have taken the lead in different aspects of it, pre-diabetes, diabetes, led by Deepa, Anjali looking at comparison pre-diabetes and diabetes in the CARS cohort versus the Masala cohort. And then we had Shivani, who's here, who wrote some very nice papers on this. Lisa, again, continuing the concept which Venkat proposed in his Kelly West Award about the two Indians, the Pima Indians and the Asian Indians, both of whom have very high rates of diabetes. By age 50, both the Pima Indians as well as the Asian Indians have a prevalence rate of 50% of diabetes. Another 30% have pre-diabetes. Only 20% are normal by age 50. And yet, complete different pathophysiology. The Pima Indians, the diabetes being driven by insulin resistance, and in the Asian Indians, predominantly by insulin secretory defect. So that's what is the tale of the two Indians. We have also had, looking at the secular trends, how the diabetes has progressed. And it's very interesting. In the places where diabetes is very high, the pre-diabetes is lower, especially in rural India. And then in urban India, when the diabetes rates go high, when the pre-diabetes rates begin to go up, it means that they're just waiting to convert. In rural areas, you'll find a lot of pre-diabetes, much less of diabetes. In urban areas, as they start converting, the pre-diabetes goes down and the diabetes goes up. And the whole country now, we're able to get such data. And again, data on health utilization, expenditure patterns, incidence of diabetes, comparing the South Asians with Pima Indians driven by Venkat, and then more studies on the pathophysiology. The Shami Lohar did a beautiful piece of work looking at if these rates are so high, what would be the ultimate, what percentage of people would ultimately develop diabetes in the big cities like Delhi and Chennai? If you're obese and have a family history of diabetes at age 20, almost 90% of people will develop diabetes by age 60. That was what was shown by Shami Luhar in this very nice paper. And again, Dimple showed very nicely that the whole cohort retention is very good. That's what she showed in this particular paper. More studies, Ram Jagannathan's work and with Suchi looking at kidney function. The trajectories of kidney function, what happens to kidney function with duration, with age, all that was brought out there. And Venkat wrote this nice paper on natural history of type 2 diabetes, which means how many years do you stay in the stage of normal glucose tolerance, and then you progress to pre-diabetes, and how long does it take you to develop from diabetes from pre-diabetes? Never described earlier in the South Asian population. Very nice article which he wrote. So from there, we've moved on, and Mo then wrote a very nice project on combining treatment, combine two comorbidities taken together, diabetes and depression. And those, of course, came from the United States, where it was shown that using the team care approach, if you treat one disorder, the other also gets better. If you treat diabetes, depression gets better. If you treat depression, diabetes gets better. So the question we asked is, can we use a similar model, a successful model in the United States, in India? And that's how the independent study. Independent stands for Integrating Depression and Diabetes Treatment. Pungode, the head of clinical trials at our center, and Moali led this study, which was done at Chennai, and it was done in New Delhi and in Bangalore and in Vizag with the support of the University of Washington and Emory University. And these are the list of collaborators. Many of the names you would know quite well. Now, why diabetes and depression? Because we know there's a vicious cycle. Diabetes makes depression worse. Okay? Now, that's not difficult to understand. So those of you who are fond of Indian sweets, gulab jamun, which we had yesterday in Mo Ali's house, if you have diabetes and say, no more gulab jamun, you'll get depressed, isn't it? So I come to Mo Ali's house and have diabetes and I can't have gulab jamun. But the other way around, depression-producing diabetes was new because so many counter-regulatory hormones work. It's like infection and diabetes. Infection makes diabetes worse, diabetes makes depression worse. So the question is, if you treat one, will the other get better? It's a very important and significant publication in JAMA, where we looked at this through a randomized clinical trial done in these 4 centers in India, led by Mo Ali. What we showed was that if you had this, what we call as the integrated care or collaborative care, using people who are not psychiatrists, and not even trained counselors. We used dietitians and educators and trained them to screen for depression and diabetes clinic, and then just to give some advice. And with that, we are able to show improvement in all the primary outcomes. So as far as diabetes was concerned, as far as depression was concerned, as far as lipids are concerned, all that was very well achieved. But the bottom line is that as long as the intervention is given, it works. When you stop, it all goes back. It's like using Ozempic. So you can keep losing weight as long as you take the Ozempic. You stop it, your weight goes up. But at least this paved the way for a completely new approach, that why not have a counselor in every diabetes clinic who can just use a simple screening tool to screen for depression. And all you need is people to interact with patients. And that itself seems to help the depression. And that's what you should, even including reduction in the A1C. So these are the learnings from the independent study, that a lot can be achieved at very low cost by just training people to become counselors. And where needed, of course, you can refer them to the psychiatrist. This is the independent team. I'm sure you'll recognize many people in this room who are here. I can see Mark also there. Then we started the next project, which is taking the learnings that we have had from DCLIP and other studies into the workplace. Can we now scale this up into various workplaces in India? That's called as the India Works for short. And again, led by Jimon and Marybeth and Ranjini. We had several collaborators here. So India Works stands for Integrating Diabetes Prevention Workplaces Across India. So we had the PHFI, Public Health Foundation of India, MDRF, Sri Chitra Tirunal, Emory, Harvard, and this was, of course, funded by NIH. And what we showed here, and these are all the kind of workplaces where, despite COVID, we managed to pull off this, this nice project. Various steel plants in India, and also Air India and Chennai Petroleum, TVS Lucas, and many, many different kinds of workplaces where we tried to introduce healthy eating, try to encourage physical activity, and see whether we can reduce the incidence of diabetes among these workers. And this is one of the dissemination meetings in 2018, which Venkat also attended with Dr. Prabhakaran, who led the study with Jimon. There's a second dissemination workshop, which we had in April 2023. And this, we even took this, when we found that this really works, we then had press conferences and distributed this message that every workplace should be a healthy workplace, encourage increasing physical activity, reducing depression, healthy eating, improve the canteens in these places. This is a very successful project that we did. And the papers are being written up. This is the first one, and many more to follow. Finally, after cars, we now started dreaming bigger, and we said we should now take up not just diabetes, but various other aspects of various other diseases. And so Precision Cars was born in the year 2023. And this has a predominantly cardiovascular outcome, and happy that Arshad is here in the audience, along with many others who are involved in this. But we're also looking at environmental exposures, pollution, air pollution, built environment. We're trying to look at various multi-omics to see whether they can explain some of the pathophysiological changes. We're also investigating spousal influences, behavioral influences. This has just started. It's ongoing, very ambitious project, but I'm sure it's going to be as productive, if not more productive, than CARS has been. And so precision cardiovascular disease phenotyping. This is precision CARS. I'm not going to go into the details of these, but these are large studies done with a lot of power, which is definitely going to give a lot of information. This is the last meeting we had on October 14th, 2022, when the PCARS team came to Chennai. And I want to tell you that on the day I left, 17th June, just before I left for the airport, we had a community advisory group. So we had people who have participated in CARS as community leaders and representing various fields. And just a couple of hours before I left for the airport, we took this picture. And I want to tell you that I was working till I left for the airport. From there, where do we go? From here, 20 years have already gone by. Have we stopped now? No, I think we're accelerating now. Sorry to say that, but we are now accelerating more and more work. And so we have from PCARS, we are now gone to PCARS Brain. And I'm happy to tell you that this project has just been funded. I'm very happy that Dr. Levi is here as well. So this is going to be a very ambitious project to look at dementia in all its aspects and to study people very early, by the age of 45, 50, who are asymptomatic, and using a battery of biochemical tests, MRIs, and so on, to try to see whether we can predict who will develop Alzheimer's. And hopefully some treatments are also coming along. These will be the first and the largest studies done on dementia in South Asian population. We also have some more studies on genomics of type 2 diabetes. A liver project has just been submitted by Rosette and colleagues. We have another study getting ready with CT coronary angiography, and hopefully one more on the lung. So you can see very few organs left, probably kidney and one or two more left. You have those ideas. Okay. So what I'm trying to tell you is that we started with virtually nothing. It was just a casual meeting, and I hope this meeting also leads to some more collaborations. When we just talked and we said, hey, why don't we collaborate? We said, oh, we don't have any money. Okay, we don't need money. We can start. And from there, I think consistently working for 20 years and keeping cohorts going and keeping collaborations, it's very easy to start something. But to keep it going for 20 years and then to build on that and to build on that and to keep it growing, I don't know of any collaboration which has achieved that. And I think that needs a round of applause to all of you for all the support that Emory has given us, because I don't think without the support of Emory, Venkat, Mo, and all the colleagues sitting here who have become very dear friends, and I don't think this is going to be the last of the collaborations. So invite me after another 20 years for another distinguished lecture, and I'll show you what we did in the next 20 years. There are other small projects. This is Pramod, who came here and spent a few months, a biochemist, young biochemist. So he's looking on metabolic memory. Just to tell you that by the side, there are other projects going on. Right now, Ram is in Chennai, working on some other projects, not directly funded, but still trying to get some new things going there. What have we achieved in terms of publications? So far, 5 more to go for the century. We have to celebrate that. 95 publications so far directly through the collaboration. 8 in the young diabetes study, 17 in DCLIP, 51 in CARS, 1 paper so far in India Works. It's been a bit slow. I think we have to speed that up. 9 from independent and 9 other papers. Apart from that, we've had students, MPH students, PhD students, both from Chennai, so I'm not even including Delhi. It's a completely different thing. There are so many people trained. I'm just talking about the MDRF and Emory collaboration. So many people have directly or indirectly benefited through this. Some have got their PhDs through this. And so I think this has been overall a fantastic collaboration. I cannot end without showing all the friends who have been part of this, not all of you for 20 years. And so for those who have not been around for 20 years, I wanted you to know how it all started, but very active collaborators who have become very close friends in the past. I'm not naming all of them, but you know all of them here, including Kerrian, who now holds the whole thing together with all the meetings, and many new people who are joining us. The team is growing and growing day by day. In India, we have a very large team as well. Nikhil Tandon, Prabhakaran, Dimple, Kavita, Preeti, Ruby, Sailesh, Siddhartha, who does work on pollution, and my team, Deepa, Radha, Rajalakshmi. And this is my whole team at MDRF, some of whom have been around with me right from day one. Some of them have been for over 30 years now with me, and still going strong. So I think it's a dawn of a new era. And when they invited me to give this talk, I thought, let's reflect on what we have done. It's always good to go back down memory lane and see what we have achieved. That will also tell us, that's very humbling, that's all you have done in 20 years. You could have done much more. But it also tells us that there are dreams that we wish to achieve in the future. And with the team growing bigger and bigger day by day, I see the day far off, and that 95 will not only cross 100, but probably reach 1,000 papers. And then we'll celebrate. Thank you very much. And let's celebrate 2 decades of Emory and DRF. Very much. Okay.
Good. Well, I'm going to reserve, we have a reception straight after this, so I'm going to reserve that time as an opportunity for many of you to ask questions to start your own new collaborations that hopefully will be reflected on again in the next 2 decades. But if I may, to actually give Dr. Mohan his award plaque, invite Dr. Ravi Tadani, who is the Executive Vice President for Health Affairs at Emory, and also the Executive Director of the Woodruff Health Sciences Center. Thank you for being with us, Ravi, and for giving some remarks.
Oh, it's here. You come up and we'll take some pictures together. I was asked to say a few words, and what can one say after an incredible presentation like that, right? I mean, you basically said it all. I had the good fortune of being in Stockholm just last week and visited the Nobel Museum, and there was a quote there that I took a picture of that reminded me. I was reminded of by this talk, and that is a quote from Ellen Sirleaf, the president of Liberia. And what she said was, if your dreams aren't scary enough, they're not big enough. And I'm just thinking back, Dr. Mohan, sitting in that garage and thinking about dreaming of where you would be years later. It's not the over 1,500 papers, it's the index of over 150, it's the 50 centers, it's the fact that not only your father was the father of diabetology in India, but you yourself and now your daughter and your son-in-law taking after your footsteps. Collaborations and tentacles that have reached throughout the world. But most importantly, that big dream, that big scary dream that you had about making an impact, I don't think there's any question about that impact. And so it doesn't surprise me, as Venkat and Mo and others in the committee have asked the question, who should they celebrate and honor as the inaugural Distinguished Lecturer recipient? Thank you very much for being here in our graces, for sharing your work with us, for the collaborations of 20 years, for 20 years from now that we continue to dream about, from centuries that will go to millennia. Could not be more thankful. So thank you, and please come up and receive this award, and we'll take a picture.
Go to Venkat also. Venkat.
You don't like the glare from the...
I don't like the light of the space, no. Have the word world across your chest.
Come on.
Perfect. Cheese and happiness, 1, 2. Congratulations. Here's to another.
Thank you.
2013.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now, in the standard tradition of diabetes lectures, we have lunch. Is that right? Please join us outside. Thank you.